My name is Sue-Huei Chen, and I'm from Taiwan. Thank you. And I would like to say my appreciation for the invitation. And I feel like an alumni because this is my second attendance of PIAD. And I got very wonderful experience last year in Mianyang, China. So when this year I got the email of invitation, quickly I decided not to go to international trauma conference in New Orleans, United States, and staying here to participate this very interesting and very informative conference and workshop. So when I got the invitation, I started to think what I'm going to share with you this year. And so this year I pick up some research data we have over the past many years. Indeed, I should say in the very beginning year after the earthquake, huge earthquake in Taiwan. So I tried to put the psychosocial adjustment point of view for young people after the disaster. So mostly I kind of review on our own data in Taiwan and share with you the research trajectory over the time. So maybe you will hear some quite immature research in the beginning, but I guess I feel comfortable to share you some not really wonderful research because over time we try to kind of learn through our own experience and from others' experience. So that's kind of the background thinking. And the reason or the concern we have for young people is that I try to think probably most people will agree that experiencing challenge or trauma could be an essential part of growing up and even essential part of being human being. So we probably have more or less some kind of negative events in our life, and for some people maybe traumatic event or experience in the life. So it sounds like it's a nature encounter, but for some people, they got that kind of encounter but cannot really get positive outcome for themselves. So what can we do to help the disaster impacted and even traumatized young people to benefit from post-traumatic growth? So the deep concern is, can we do something to help them, like coming out from the disaster and got some good things, and then help them to grow up being a better person in the future. And that's the concern for all the study. But I'd like to share you one photo done by a young boy who was a survivor at the 921 GG earthquake in 1999. And at the time, he made a record being trapped the longest time, probably 5 days or several days, in the ordeals and got rescued. But this young boy was not lucky enough because he lost his parents and his young sister. So when he was rescued, put in the hospital, he was mute, no words at all. Yeah, we should say probably he got so panicky and so shocked. So they asked a clinical psychologist, a child clinical psychologist, to approach him. And the only thing he shared with the surrounding is drawing, because he said nothing and no response. So they gave him, something to draw, and that's what he gave to the psychologist, the first picture. And this picture later got put on one publication for some public. So I got this from the organization that I'm going to use it because being a clinical psychologist, maybe some of you are in the same field, we think this is very meaningful. And from psychological point of view, or maybe from psychodynamic point of view, and even more from psychoanalytic point of view. This young man, 5 years old, he cannot reach out. So you can see the children's drawing that his, both hands just reach out. And later on, we know this kind of teddy bear or some baby toy in fact, as the toy of his sister, who slept next to him and died over those dates. So later on, I found he drew several pictures, almost like this one. And it's a tragedy, but this young man gave a very colorful outcome to us. And some people would say it looks like he, like closed the eyes. In psychology term, it's like he did not want to see the reality. But I'm not quite sure because I don't have any in-depth interview. But from this picture, it's so much like a young kids trying to reach out, and he lay on the bed, and I cannot imagine over time he was there breathing, but the surrounding in the early time, maybe in my imagination, maybe the sister was there and then passed away. So he reached out. But later on, I didn't know this young man, but later on from some report, he seems to do very well. He was raised by his relative, and they gave him a very wonderful family. This is what I learned later on, and I'm still hoping these young people and many kids like him can survive over time and grow very nicely. Okay, so this is kind of a sharing to you, and this concerns me what the earthquake or nature disaster could bring to some young people. And it's kind of a quick review, so I'm going to share you the information about our Gigi earthquake. And early on, Dr. Candice Long has introduced you that was a very huge shake. I live in Taipei. It's kind of a around 200 kilometer away from the epicenter. But while the earthquake occurred, all our family got awake and woken. And the shake, I think the most scary part at that event is because its duration, not only the shake, because I guess most people living in Taiwan, you experience some shake once in a while, but all the shake are just some second. But that one lasts almost less than 1 minute, but it's lasting. Okay, and that occurred in the Sun Moon Lake. It's a central part of Taiwan, and being a Taiwanese, I kind of give you a little bit, like a scenery introduction. It's a very beautiful area, and it's Sun Moon Lake because the geography looks like a sun and moon lake. And it's a nice scenery area, so if any of you want to stay longer, I guess it's a good place to visit, not so far away from here, and very nice resort area. During the time in Taiwan, being a psychologist, you went to the reach out help group services. But at the time, I think we probably need to do some psychological research as evidence for, kind of building up program for that time and maybe for the future. Hopefully not, but I thought we need to do some work. But there's lack at the time. We don't have assessment tool. We don't have epidemiological data about PTSD or about disaster-caused psychological problem. We don't have study of risk or protective factor at the time. And not to say the intervention program. So what can we do? And it's even worse for young people. So that's nothing. So we start from zero. And I guess I try to put this to share some of you, maybe you were from the situation where you got similar experience nowadays, and you need to start it right away. Otherwise, after 10 years, we will say the same conclusion. So during the time, we try to put some study, and luckily we got grounded by our National Science Council. Now it's called Ministry of Science and Technology. And for young people, in fact, in the literature, we can review and conclude that there include some risk factor of trauma or PTSD, and these are the list. So I'm going to present you the data, taking some of the factors. I cannot do all together in one study. So some study will pick up some variable and look into the outcome or the findings. So the first series of data, we try to look for the very original research in PTSD area which concern exposure and concern age and gender and time. So here's the data. We got one series of research for 5 years at the same location. In the very beginning, we tried to survey some data from Dongshi and Puli, which I just introduced you, the most damaged 2 towns in around the epicenter. And we decided to do this design because they are all damaged, but doesn't mean the whole town are wiped out. So we pick up elementary school and junior high, and we make control, should not say control, but match for, one school they stay the same, but the other part is they got damaged or collapsed. So the kids cannot stay at the same school for education for a couple of months. So within one town, we have comparison. So we have elementary, junior high, and then 2 towns, and then school got collapsed, school stayed the same. Okay, so we collect, I should not say huge, I know compared to some study, they have, many times our sample size. And we pick up a 1st grade to 9th grade grader in those situations. Okay, and we decide to collect data because the grant come up 1 year later. Should not say 1 year, even longer. But we studied before we had the grant. We got some support from the principal and the teacher. So we sent our reach out group for services and then become some research cooperation with them. So the data was collected. We decided to give the survey every year the same period of time, and which was late after the anniversary because we want to skip anniversary effect because everyone knows the anniversary effect. When people got some experience and during their anniversary time, they probably present more suffer, more symptom. But we want to see kind of a more natural situation. So that's the situation. We collect data. And also in this series of data, the reason we can continue to collect data, we put some services together. For each school, we got the support from school, from the teacher, and we will give them some feedback about their children. And surely we study at the same school, but not necessarily with the same kids. Because in Taiwan, the elementary and junior high, students will change their class every year. And we cannot really do each one in the follow-up. That's why we collect the data and compare whether each year we got a similar sample to continue. And those samples, for our data, we ask many background information about their exposure. For example, like whether they've been hurt themselves, whether their family member being killed or being injured, or whether they have friends, because friends are important for young people, whether their friends are hurt or killed, and also whether they stay in the same household, living in the same area, or they were forced to move. And these are kind of the background information we ask. So for the first year, the second year, the sample are, I should say, kind of equivalent. Then we can compare. Okay, and that's the estimation because we did not do diagnostic interview. We do their self-report, and from their self-report, we estimated, the prevalence situation. So that's the PTSD, estimated PTSD rate change over the first year and second year. And interestingly, sure, or lucky, naturally, the rate goes down from first year to second year. And also the data pattern similar to some depression data with young people because women or girls seem to be more affected, but the girl in junior high, not in elementary school. the younger generation, they have like a boy seems to be more vulnerable. Remember early on we put some learning on vulnerability. Looks like a young boy could be more vulnerable by the earthquake or natural disaster. But the elementary, a little bit older girl in junior high, they present more PTSD rates. And the first two rows are the PTSD diagnostic estimation, and these are the full diagnosis and partial diagnosis. Because at the time, the diagnosis has been discussed, whether we should put all these like across the A and B, C, D. And some argue that for young people, maybe we should not put the very rigorous diagnostic criteria. We should have different kinds. So we also calculate the partial diagnosis based on DSM, at the time DSM-4R. And that's the situation. And also, we look more into their PTSD symptom and similar pattern that some kids can recover naturally over time, over the first year and second year. But after disaster, seems they suffer more by intrusive symptom than avoidance symptom. If we follow Holloway's two-factor model of trauma, and that's the situation. But it's kind of similar to what we have already learned these days, that intrusion follow all the impact. But avoidance, do we need to put avoidance as part of the diagnosis, or it's kind of the consequence of the symptom? And that's a research issue even by these states. Okay, so looks like the exposure dose effect. For those young people who got more exposure, for example, who lost family or who lost friends, they presented more PTSD rates or more PTSD symptoms. So hypervigilance, worry, misfortune, example like they continue worrying whether tomorrow will be worse and dark and something like this. And also they worry about all those misfortune may occur to them again. And also their psychological distress like depressive symptom, anxiety symptom, by encountering related situations seems to be some of their suffering problem, and sleep problem were also most frequently reported. At this point, I kind of like to share you, not in the data, but in our services. During the time, we work with a group of school teachers for elementary school who are PE teacher, physical exercise teacher, who are painting teacher. So we found some ground to give them the material to bring back in their classroom to help their young people. So they have the very natural data on children's drawing or exercise, and later on after several weeks of the program, kids come up some story or come up some design. And one of the very interesting stories, some kids, younger kids got nightmare, cannot sleep. And the teacher will help them to use a little bit so-called art therapy to help them. So they will draw like this is a monster, earthquake is the monster. And they draw it in the dark color. And in the classroom, the teacher invite the kids and other classroom, say, let's work together to kill the monster. So they draw it and then tear off all the papers. Interestingly, some kids got okay later on, they got good sleep again. And that is not in the research data, but in the clinical outreach services. And we found this kind of data a lot. I share this information because early on I kind of heard some people would ask, if we have a very wonderful research model, we still want to ask, what can we do clinically, or what can we do in the real practice? And I agree with some of the talk that we probably cannot wait until everything is clear, then to provide services, because the suffering is always there. So we probably will use whatever we learn from psychology and then try. The core issue is that we try to help those suffering young kids or adults coming up and back to their real life and natural life. That's probably being a clinician or being people working in the clinical area would concern this kind of situation. So that's what we do. I don't know that's the good way or not, but that's the situation in the very beginning. And kids have fun, and teachers feel they are helping their young kids. So everyone got the positive result. Surely there are still people suffering, even after those programs. Okay, so the second part of question or research question I ask is about what kind of trauma type, because earthquake is one kind of natural disaster, but people have encountered all kinds of trauma, right? Like step on an apple and broke your leg is a trauma. But if the person is resilient, then it's just accident. You're going to be traumatized. But what type of trauma would damage people more than the other kind? And gender has been an issue because gender has been reported in psychology distress research. For example, depression has been reported more women than men. And PTSD seems to be presented in the same pattern. So we got the natural design research at the time because after the earthquake, 2 years later, in the summertime, there was a very huge typhoon called Taozhi typhoon. And that typhoon, interestingly, affect central Taiwan more than the past. When I was in Puli, where I told you the very damaged town, people there, they have been living in the life in Puli, told me that this particular typhoon even more scary for them than Gigi earthquake. And I asked why. They say, I've been living here for 3 decades, but I never had typhoon. I said, how come in Taipei once in a while, each year we have 1 or 2 or 3 typhoon? Later on I learned because Puli town is an area of a village surrounded by mountain, but the earthquake reshaped it. So that's what they say, it's a local people say. So much like the earthquake opened one like a link for the typhoon to come in. So during that typhoon, the whole night, it's so much like a typhoon like a snake into the village, but found no way to get out. So the rain, the winds over the whole night just there. And even some people say they have to stay, the adult have to stay awake and then, try to hold their window or door because they were so scared their whole house will be damaged. That's the typhoon. And that typhoon also bring quite a lot of rain. So the picture you see, this one is the highway. Got flooding in the highway, so you can see it's kind of strange. And because the typhoon especially impact on the central part, where was the earthquake site? So we have the follow-up studies during the time and say, okay, maybe we just try to see, it's kind of a double trauma, which has been reported in the literature, but not in the empirical research form. So we decide to collect and ask the young people different type of trauma and see different type of trauma impact on them. And the research on PTSD at the time or even now, we always ask what's the most impacted or what's the most distressed event you have ever encountered. And then you endorse one event, then you use that event to respond your PTSD symptom. So we ask kids the same question, and some kids still see 9/1, the Gigi earthquake was the most distressed event in their life at the time. They are young people, but a lot of, even another group of kids would say Taozhi typhoon was the most distressed one. And the other 2 reported accident is car accident and domestic violence. In the literature these days, we know human-made trauma was much damaging than natural disaster. That's the data reported by research from different areas, from United States, from Asia area. So our data also shows that in terms of their PTSD symptom severity, human-made violence, domestic violence, is the most scary part for young people because they presented more symptoms than the rest group. And car accidents the same because it's kind of more frequent for people to encounter. In fact, in the literature, car accident is the #1 most frequently encountered trauma for human beings. And earthquake and Taozi typhoons, they similar damaging, effect, and that's the trauma type and gender. And mostly young girls reported more symptoms than boys. So we have the background information, then we kind of coming back to psychology research and want to learn what the person holds, may play any kind of role in their adjustments. So cognitive approach is one of the very popular approach for clinical psychology. And we also like to ask what kind of cognitive coping, for example, like a trauma attribution and meaning making, young people would report. So we got one research on trauma attribution and meaning making with the group of young people from Central Park, close to the epicenter. I remember it's in Dongsichang, and we collect the data. But the question we kind of like to ask, what make a traumatic event so distressing? We probably all learned that even encounter similar trauma or the same trauma, only a few a small group of people got very serious adjustment later on. Most people got distress in the beginning, but then naturally recover by yourself without any psychological intervention. I should say without any professional intervention. People have way to heal in their life. But we like ask if there anything in the cognitive sense that we learn, then we can put that in the intervention program to help. So we ask, and making sense of the event in life indeed plays a very central role in adaptation of adversity and also in traumas. But trauma violates what we believe. We believe that's never had any terrible things in our life, which is not true. But we learn that through events, not through textbook, right? So there are a couple of very important model and theory. For example, like a Janoff woman say we have the justice word assumption, and that is very subtle and very intrinsic. Until we encounter something, then it's become explicit. So when you got negative event, then you start to think, why it happened to me? It's unfair. Why is wrong hurts them? It hurts me. It's unfair. Why people should be good but they are not good? Why my tomorrow should be bright but doesn't feel that way? And that's the three main basic assumption people may hold, proposed by Janoff woman. So we got that kind of situation. We try to see whether young people may be affected in that early age by this event, if they trust the words or they don't. So that's the research coming up. And we think if we can find more information, because past research, not on trauma, but on depressional things, we say if people tend to use internal attribution, they tend to have experienced more depression or distress kind of situation. So if that would be true in GG earthquake impacting young people. Okay, so I kind of like to go quickly to the research purpose. So that particular research, we try to investigate the subjective attribution of damage or loss, and also the meaning making after that in adolescents. And those adolescents are living in the epicenter, and the data was collected 10 months after the very huge impact. And we also want to see if their attribution really correlated, or should not say influence because it's cross-sectional study, whether the attribution associated with their PTSD symptom or depression. But for this part, I report PTSD symptom. And we collect about 263 young kids, and half boy, half girls, and they are at the very beginning of their adolescence. The mean age is around 14. Among this small group, 14% of them were mildly or moderately injured themselves, and 16% of young people lost their family. No, sorry, I correct. Around 6% of this sample, they lost their family, but 16% have family got injured by the earthquake. And also 16% of the young people, they lost their house, but more than half, their house was damaged, but they can kind of repair the house and stay at the same location. And we developed some major and used some foreign translated major. Just like I say at the time, a lot of tools need to be built during the research. So we decided to collect their attribution. So I designed a complete, I make a storytelling questionnaire, like ask them to write down some story about earthquake. So we call it complete earthquake story test. And also we have, during the research, we developed the earthquake exposure index for use. Surely we have for adults, but for this we use for youth. And then also we borrow a very famous PTSD major from UCLA team. So it's called UCLA PTSD index for DSM-4. Now they should change to 5, but that was the time. Okay, and we, in this storytelling test, which consists of 4 scenarios about earthquake experience and 1 overall subjective evaluation about their own self-image. And the design, the 4 story or 4 scenario try to tackle the attribution of the damage or loss. So the story is like, not the kids say, Mary has her leg broken over the earthquake, and what would you think, what she would think? And then later on say, if you were Mary, what would you think? And this is kind of a not sentence completion, but they just try to fill in or answer the question. Or we would ask if like John lost their house because the earthquake, now they have to move out, and what would you think he would think this whole event? And then the last question would say, if you were John, what would you think? And then the overall subjective evaluation will ask about, do you think, what kind of you? Are you a good person, nice person, or what do you think about yourself? And that's the design. Okay, and then exposure index, just like we have early on, if you lost your house, if you got damage, or if you lost your friend or neighbor or family, such like that, and then we make it a exposure index. And the PTSD index, I think I don't need to say more, but it's just like over the past experience, what is the most distressing one? And then if you have all the class, the BCD symptoms, and you check out whether that occurred in the past months. Okay, and the procedure is similar like what I say. We ask the young people to fill in all in the classroom. So it's not an individual assess, it's a class small group assessment. And all the response were checked by 2 trained assistants. So we have the inter-rater reliability, which is kind of nice. And then we do all the chi-square analysis on all the background information to kind of tease out all the possibly confounding background information. And this is the result. About the attribution and controllability, which was designed in the storytelling, and it's more than 50% of the adolescents would tend to use internal attribution about the encounter, such like if you broke the leg, you think that's your own fault because you should run faster, or they don't think it's because the earthquake was so huge, and that's kind of internal. But if the writing is about, because the earthquake was too huge, no one can avoid it, then it's external attribution. Things like that. So we have the calculation about their injury, about their loss, or things like damage. And the results also say about 73% of the students, they still, even they give all kind of attribution, but they still feel very strong control over their life, control over their future, which is a good sign. Because if you lost your controllability over life, over your encounter, then people tend to develop depression symptoms. But these young people still have the strength inside. But then these are the data, and I guess the conclusion, I'm not going to give you all the detailed information, but if you are interested, we can discuss later. And then we also like to find out how they make meaning from this kind of suffering, because the damage is huge. So how young people making sense of this encounter, and this is kind of based on the just the word hypothesis I said earlier, based on Gemma, Bowman, and other scholars' proposal. So we found they are about half. They are still, at the time, they cannot make a decision. They are still searching meaning for such negative encounter. They don't know whether it's positive or I should put it negative. They are still searching. But quite a big percentage of young people would think it's kind of negative. And sure, it's a negative encounter, but they feel negative about the situation. And also, most people, they break their just the words hypothesis. They think the word is no more justice, and which we should probably do more follow-up study to see if we don't really believe it's justice, whether it's a true bias or whether it's a way for us to enhance our resilience in living. But for young people, 20-some%, they keep the justice word belief. They still think the word should be justice. People around should be very positive. But some young people will say no more like this. And some young people, they did not wire up the belief, but they were kind of think maybe yes, maybe not. The belief was shaking at the time. And a small group of people, around 10% of young people, would say that's fate. That's our fate. And they cannot really think anymore about how to think that's fate, whether it's a good fate or a negative fate, but they think that's just fate, no more. Okay. And how about the earthquake, after the earthquake, whether they change their own concept, and whether their concept stay positive, stay negative, were related to whether they develop some PTSD symptom. And our data says that let's look at these two parts. They project, because I asked, remember in the storytelling, all the last question were asked if you were John, if you were Mary, that's a projected self. And then we have the one last big question about the true self. You evaluate your own self. And that's the data, when the subjective self were asked, and the people were still like they still have a positive self-image, and that's what I said earlier. It's kind of for me, maybe more like to see more young people, they have the positive self-image. But from the clinical viewpoint, it's a concern, and maybe a big concern, because we have some portion of young people, their self-image is pretty negative. And I should say, unfortunately, I don't have other data to compare. I mean, other data collected from non-earthquake impact area to see whether those change. But we, in the questionnaire, in the test, do ask them to attribute related to the earthquake experience. But we have another data early on to collect data from the Taipei city and try to see whether people live in Taipei and whether people live in central part of Taiwan experience the same earthquake. I should not say same, because in different locations, your experience are totally different. We have to adopt data and really see the distance help or protect, because we are not that exposed to the huge, but we don't have young people's data, so I cannot really say if they attribute to the earthquake, that's good enough to say yes, the earthquake impact. But that's the data we have. We kind of like to see, but we worry about those blue line that they are a kind of big portion of young people still have the very negative situation affected by the earthquake. Okay, and for other attribution, for example, like the story about injured and is a projective story. So projective injured or projective secondary adversity means their surrounding has changed. How do they think about that? And young people will report it pretty negative for projected figure, not themselves. But coming back to themselves, they are more positive than negative. And that's the situation about these young people. And those who projected a most negative self-image display more PTSD symptoms. So when we try to think if we have this kind of data, probably these people, this young group of young people, maybe deserve more attention during those days. If we can build up some school-based intervention, probably we can quickly help them to reconcile their experience and maybe come back some more positive about the situation, which could be a protective situation for them to grow up. But that's the data kind of, I hope not going to take too much to explain, but that's kind of the hope for doing disaster research. And also like the earthquake, those who indulge in more negative affect, or they use a lot of self-destructive saying or way to cope. That's about 13% of young people, they tend to use negative way to cope. Seem to present more problem and more symptoms, and which is also the concern for building up some intervention in the early stage. 10 months should not say early enough, but it's at least for the first year, because our other data say some young people naturally coming better from the first year to the second year. So it looks like the first 2 years may be the critical time for helper to really help them to kind of facilitate their growth, rather than staying in the very negative coping situation. Okay, so then we ask whether the environment could be, early on we asked individual cognitive coping, but one study we have done is try to see whether the reason might be part in the environment. And early on, I say in the very beginning, our early design we put in the same town, but the school next to each other, and one got damaged, the other one got okay. I should say, in those two towns, there are not many schools, so we don't have really random selected data. Probably they just like, we want to do even senior high, but they have only one senior high, so we cannot really compare. But they probably have 4 junior high or 2 junior high, so luckily one stayed the same, the other one got even damaged, so we can have this nature match or nature pair of situation. And it's the data we ask. We ask, are those earthquake impacted youth spoiled by or benefit from their school physical condition? And that's the story. And our data really found some interesting situation. And this is kind of a little bit unique, because most psychology research on person, individual situation, even in the collective way, but we kind of like to look into our psychological mind. But this data try to see if we just ask whether the surroundings are similar or different. Would that bring in some positive, negative situation for young people? And also the study is a kind of prospective design, because the first year, and we use the second year PTSD situation to predict. So that's the question, and I think this is a paper, so I'm not going to give you the detail. I think I just come back to the conclusion is that those young people stay at the same school setting, stay better even the second year. Those students, their school got physically damaged, they have to be like move out or use other situation for education. They present in collective way, worse way, significantly. And in the first year, I guess some people, I don't know whether it's similar in other country or not. For those young people in the school, they cannot really move students out, right? They live in the neighborhood. So I remember in the first couple of months, some students will go to big tree for classroom. They have classroom under big tree in the sunny day, which is kind of nice, but not really nice. And later on, they have container classroom, so they can avoid rain, but it's so hot. So they have that kind of situation for a couple of months until their school got rebuilt. And that's the situation we found the second year, they are still in the situation and they present or they experience worse situation than students from other school. Okay, so then we ask whether the social support can be very important factor. And we have this kind of a situation. We try to see whether exposure to earthquake may associate with their social relationship, because in the meta-analysis done by Western scholars, that social support is kind of a critical factor for young people following disaster. And that's from the individualistic society. And we try to think, we are at the collective society, the culture are different, whether social support is the same important factor for young people to do their psychological adjustment after the disaster. So we have this kind of model to examine, and it's a prospective, because we also have the data from first year to second year. And the result found interestingly, for boys and for girls, the patterns are different. Do I have more time, or I have already used up my time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Just like to say, when we try to help young people, in fact, gender is important. Because for young boy, I said female first, their subjective experience and objective exposure together affect whether they have PTSD later on, the second year. But for young boy, the environment or the objective experience do affect PTSD at the second year directly. This probably get us some insights that young girl, probably like a lot of female, in the very beginning, they have a lot of, like a subjective attribution, subjective coping, which play important role in their adjustment. For young boy in our sample, looks like if we can create some better objective situation, probably can protect them from being, suffer from PTSD after disaster. That's the pattern, give us the insight. And in those models, we really see, for example, like a social support is in a good sense, but social relationship seems going to not quite the same as social support, because Western say you got social support, you got some protection. But in our data we found, it looks like, the affection or the path going to different direction. If you got worse negative social relationship or social interaction, then the second year, 1 year later, you indeed experience more negative situations, such like a PTSD symptom. And that's the model we have, and it's cross-sectional. It's prospective, so we use the first year PTSD, and then try to calculate, and then second year PTSD, and using social support, doing two-way, and then to predict. And that's the story saying, in fact, the PTSD stay up to the second year need to go into negative social interaction, not the social support in general. So social support could be protective, but we need to go into more subtle way to think, because a lot of people, in fact, got a lot of pressure from social relationship. And I'm not quite sure whether Western individualistic society can get a similar situation, but at least in this kind of culture, I guess Asian is kind of a more social or collective-oriented situation, and the culture should take into our thinking about intervention building the program. So the conclusion, I'm not going to read it because based on all the detailed data we know, exposure in fact is something we cannot prevent because it's exposure. So exposure doses effects stay as in our data, which is similar to Western data, but PTSD symptoms naturally decline, probably between first year and second year. Gender, age, type of trauma, secondary adversity should all play some influential role for young people to adjust their life after the disaster. Okay, so some final remark. I would think because trying to look for some possible way to help people in terms of research or in terms of clinical intervention or practice, probably all different situations need to take into consideration and try to look into all these variables. That's why I think research is important, because now we would like to have more evidence intervention program, not just take from our clinicians' experience. We probably need to find more evidence, then we can predict our intervention program can succeed or maybe just fail to help those young people. And coping efforts for them to recover. In fact, we cannot really check on the PC cost, like the cost and benefits in the huge situation. But we kind of believe that if we do some professional help or in education program or in professional help program, we probably can do some good things for young people to help them adjust their encounter to very negative situations, such like the earthquake or some kind of trauma. I know I have not much time to talk, but in terms of trauma work, I also think taking it into temporal dimension is important, because anything after the crisis or trauma or disaster, at different situation, different time, we probably need to develop a different way, then can bring better benefits for our intervention program. And that is not only true in clinical work, but also for research. And I truly follow or believe what's early on present Rena's slides, that longitudinal study, prospective design is important, because we do need to learn from the situation and probably come up some wisdom to do our clinical interventional services. So thank you very much.
Well, I have two questions. My first question is about, from time to time, we're looking for the main active ingredients in psychosocial intervention, which done to our subject in order to replicate the study. So in your experience, what is the main active ingredients in psychosocial intervention, which you show us in the reduction symptom from first year to second year? Is it related to the local context or maybe related to peer support? Which age need development in youth? Maybe you could elaborate more. And the second question is about ethical perspective. During research in the subject with severe post-traumatic syndrome, is it a specific intervention, like for instance medication or so on? Because we knew from the evidence, you mentioned the profound effect of domestic violence to the youth, and the evidence said that 70% of them in the future became victims of domestic violence itself or became a perpetrator of domestic violence in her family. So is there any specific intervention from this group of your study? Thank you.
For the two questions, indeed, the first one is I try to give people for discussion. So can I set that one for later when we have group discussion? Because I would think, because I put all this together, because I think all ingredients should put all together. And if you ask me which one is the most, core, probably I don't have the data to say which one. So I cannot, when I try to put all my presentation, I did my first question to everyone to discuss. Second one, I think is a very important question because we found some kids, they in fact affected by some traumas. And in our study, my study is just research, so we don't deliver clinical services. But if we leave them alone, it seems a little bit unethical or not kind. In fact, we have another professor who runs school-based group treatments for young people in their school base, and they went from Taipei. They from Taipei went to the site every week there, and also during the situation in Dongshi town, the team, the leader, they built up a clinic for school to refer case because the mental health personnel is not enough at the time. So a lot of people, like in the township, they built a clinic. I remember it's for 2 years. And then for teacher to refer young kids or their parents to bring them to the clinic. And the clinician coming from some school and locally, they are child clinical psychologists there to do play therapy. They also build up a play therapy room for them to help those people, those young kids who were found probably in the bad situation, and they were referred there and seek the help weekly. So I'm not quite sure. It's not from my own study because it's a big research team. So my colleague would go there every week I remember for 2 years in the very beginning. Unfortunately, or I don't know how to say, because the grant supports and the donation support only for that time. So later on, all the equipment just donate to the town for them to build up their real lasting clinic. But to my knowledge, that did not happen. And I believe that's the situation in many, because building up some center or help probably require more or request more funding or things like that. But during the research time, there was one clinic in Dongshi town building up by the research team, and they do provide clinical services, not only for research.
I'm Piers from the Philippines. My question is something to do with the earthquake scenario, complete earthquake scenario test that you created. How did you deal with the possible issue of re-traumatization, or did you experience that when they were asked to make sense of their experience or to tell stories about their experience with the earthquake?
In the storytelling test is designed for that particular event. So most stories are around Gigi earthquake. And in each scenario, we would ask the experience, because we use, for kids, we cannot develop the projection story. So we say so much like, Mary lived in this town and she's, how old is she? And then they lost the house, or they lost one leg, or they lost one family, and ask them to say, what do you think? This, what would be the cause you think? And what would you think? What would attribute to the situation? That's the question. And then because they write down all the answer, and then we do greater rating for the result. Do I answer your question?
I was interested in whether you considered the possibility that if they were asked these questions, they will be re-traumatized. It's like the feeling that they're back in the scene in that event. Was that ever an issue in your study?
No, we only collect their own true experience using the PTSD index scale. Ask them, since earthquake, what's the trauma or PTSD symptom they still have. That's what we have for the PTSD data. But in the projective story, we did not ask what would you think Mary could be, we did not ask them to projectively rating PTSD symptoms. The PTSD symptom severity is all for them, about themselves and about the earthquake experience. The content in the storytelling is pretty general and vague because the survey we know, in their surrounding, quite a lot of people, big percentage of the young people experience losing friends, losing their house. So the question is very general. We did not ask very detailed. It's just like one sentence, Mary has one leg broken during the earthquake, and then I ask them to. So I guess this kind of question is very often used in children's major about their negative experiences. So probably, and should not say only probably, it is not valid any ethic court.
You've mentioned about coping in terms of avoidant responses. Can you give us some specific behavioral avoidant mechanism that you've seen among the respondents? Yes, ma'am.
That is in the PTSD measure. And according, because nowadays there are two debates, whether there are 3-component model for PTSD or 2-component model for PTSD. And at the time I follow with 2-factor model. That means, in his theory, he said PTSD consists intrusive symptom cluster and also avoidance cluster. Mm-hmm. And the avoidance so much like I try not to think, I try not to go to the same area, which is very similar to what it explained or described in the DSM system or in what we learn. It's kind of a general avoidance behavior, thinking or behaviorally.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
I think mahjong is a way of support.
I should say more about mahjong. People like that, but no, I'm kidding, because to me it's kind of also a very interesting finding, because I said, well, we thought they should be very suffer, but at the same time, people need to find some good way to deal with daily situation. And that's the data you present earlier. It looks like, their resilience go up and down, but also their negative result kind of parallel. And which indeed is the data in research area, your PTSD go with positively, in many studies, positively with PTG growth. It's so much like a negative, positive go together in a period of time after the disaster. So that is probably the very common situation in the trauma area. Yeah.
Thank you. With that,